Wyoming Territory, December 1879. The wind howled like a dying animal, clawing its way over the open plains and through the teeth of the Wind River Range. Snow came down in sheets, thick and blinding, swallowing everything but the sharp silhouette of a woman standing alone on the ridge, her rifle held steady, her coat flaring behind her like a banner of war. Penelope Garrison did not flinch. She had tracked them for over a day through the snow, 3 men who had taken what they had no right to. Her father was buried now, a fresh grave behind the cabin, and the 2 mules were gone. But worse, far worse, was the boy they had taken with them. Benji, her younger brother, 10 years old. Too small to fight them off, too smart to forget. She should have gone after them sooner, but the storm had come fast. And now she stood on a bluff above a narrow pass, rifle aimed, waiting for their return. A shadow moved through the white, then a horse. Just one. She narrowed her eyes, finger brushing the trigger. The rider came closer, hunched in the saddle, snow clinging to his hat and shoulders. He was not one of the 3. Too tall, too clean. He saw her and slowed, then raised a gloved hand in peace. "Ma'am," he called, voice carrying over the wind. "I reckon you can shoot me if you like, but I would rather talk first." She did not lower the rifle. He dismounted anyway, boots crunching in the snow, and stepped toward her, arms out, no gun in sight. "Name's Asa Keller. I was riding from Lander when I found the boy." Her heart slammed once hard. "Benji." "Where is he?" she asked, voice sharp. "Safe," Asa said. "Cold, hungry, but safe. He was tied up to a tree half a mile from here, said his sister was coming." Penelope lowered the rifle with a shaky breath. The wind stung her eyes, but she blinked it away. Asa took off his coat without another word and stepped toward her. She stiffened, but he draped it around her shoulders anyway, slow and careful, like she might bolt. "You can shoot later," he said gently. "Love now." She stared up at him, stunned. The words hit deeper than she expected. "I do not know you," she said, voice unsteady. "No, but you will," Asa replied, brushing snow from her cheek. "Let us get your brother first." She nodded, too tired to fight it. They made their way down the ridge, his hand steady on her back as she stumbled once on the ice. The wind screamed louder, but somehow it felt quieter with him near. Benji was where Asa promised, wrapped in a wool blanket near a small fire in a hollow. His little face lit up when he saw her, and she dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "Penny," he cried, "I knew you would come." She held him tight, burying her face in his hair. "I told you I would never leave you." Asa turned away, giving them space, but she looked up at him. "You saved him." "He said he had a sister who could shoot the wings off a hawk," Asa said with a small smile. "I figured I better find her before the storm did." Penelope stood slowly, still holding Benji's hand. "What happened to the men?" "I followed their tracks west." "Looks like they split once the weather turned. Cowards." "I want them gone," she said. "I do not care where, just gone." "They will not come back," Asa said. "I made sure of that." She did not ask what he meant. She did not want to know. The storm worsened as night fell. Asa led them to a lined shack tucked into the tree's bare bones, but solid. He built a fire while Penelope warmed Benji's hands, whispering to him until his eyes fluttered shut. "He is lucky," Asa said softly, watching her from across the firelight. "He is all I have left." "You have me now," he said without hesitation. She looked up sharply. "I know we just met," Asa said, "but I know what I saw. You stood in a blizzard with a rifle for that boy." "That kind of love, I would follow that anywhere." Penelope stared at him, her heart loud in her chest. "Why?" "Because I want something real," he said. "And I think you might be it." Silence settled between them, warm and full. She crossed the room slowly and sat beside him. Her shoulder touched his, and he did not move away. "I am not easy," she said. "I do not want easy," he whispered. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire burned low and warmth bloomed slow and certain between them. And for the first time in days, Penelope let herself breathe. Morning broke flat and gray. The sky hung low and heavy, pressing down on the timberline. A thin crust of ice had formed on the windows overnight, catching the first light and scattering it across the rough plank walls of the lined shack. Penelope sat near the hearth, legs tucked beneath her, mending the heel of Benji's sock with careful, practiced stitches. The boy still slept, curled into the wool blanket Asa had carried in from his saddle roll. His breath came slow and even, lashes dark against wind-chapped cheeks. Asa, crouched beside the stove, poured water from a dented kettle into a tin cup. His wool shirt clung damp to his shoulders from shaking snow off the firewood. He stood and handed her the cup, steam curling between their fingers. "You always mend by firelight?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Needle won't wait for daylight." He eased down across from her, the floor groaning beneath his boots. "You sew like you've patched more than socks." "Once stitched up a bullet hole in my father's shoulder," she said. "Thread's thread, doesn't care what it pulls through." Asa nodded. "That's grit." She folded the sock and placed it beside her. "It's survival." Benji stirred, stretching like a cat before blinking toward the warmth. Penelope rose and knelt beside him, brushing his hair back with quiet hands. "You hungry?" she asked. He nodded, still half in sleep. Asa pulled a tin of beans from his saddlebag and set it near the embers. "We'll eat, then ride. I've got a place half a day south. Barn's tight, stove strong, you'll be warmer there." "We can't stay long," she said. "There's the trap line, the cabin." "The cabin'll keep," Asa said. "You won't." She studied his face. No push behind the words, just calm certainty. He didn't speak like a man trying to impress, only one who'd seen too many folks freeze from pride. "What's at your place?" she asked. "2 milk cows, 1 lame mule, and a blue kettle with half a handle." "Nothing fancy, but it's mine." Benji perked up. "Do you have books?" Asa scratched his jaw. "1, Psalms, but I reckon we could find more." Penelope watched the boy's smile flicker. He hadn't smiled since before their father died. She stood, brushing her skirt smooth. "We'll come," she said. "For now." They rode out before noon, snow packed hard beneath the horses' hooves. Benji rode with Asa, wrapped in his sister's old cloak and clutching the saddle horn with mittened hands. Penelope kept to the rear, her eyes scanning the ridgelines, rifle still slung across her back. The trail wound through pine and aspen, the trees whispering above them. They passed no one, just heaps of snow and the wind's low hum through the branches. At mid-afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Asa's homestead below a squat frame house with a sod roof, smoke curling from the chimney, and a barn leaning slightly eastward like it had grown tired one winter and never quite stood straight again. Penelope dismounted first, boots crunching through ice. She lifted Benji down and walked him to the porch. Asa held the door open. "Watch that bottom step. It's got a mind of its own." Inside, warmth clung to the walls, the air thick with the scent of cedar and old flour. A braided rug lay before the stove, faded and curled at the edges. Penelope set Benji near the heat, pulling off his wet boots. Asa busied himself by the cupboard, pulling out salt pork, dried apples, and cornmeal. "Supper will be humble." "We're used to humble," she said. He glanced at her, then back to the skillet. "Well, I'll do what I can to surprise you." They ate in quiet, the kind that settled easy among people who'd already said the most important things without needing much noise. Later, after Benji fell asleep curled on the rug, Penelope stepped outside. The air had stilled. She leaned against the porch post, arms folded, watching the moon cast silver over the pasture. Asa joined her, jacket unbuttoned, hat in hand. "He'll stay warm in there," she said. I made sure of it. She traced a line in the frost along the railing with her fingertip. You always live alone. I did, he said. Didn't think I minded it. And now he turned to her, eyes steady. Now I mind it more than I did. She met his gaze. I don't know what comes next. Then we'll figure it out slow. I'm not asking for your whole life. What are you asking for? He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough to feel the heat between them. A place in it. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders eased, not dropped but eased. You don't know what I carry. You don't have to carry it alone. They stood like that in the hush of snow and moonlight, and though nothing more passed between them, the quiet filled with something new. Not hope, not yet, but the shape hope might take if given room. The days that followed moved with the quiet rhythm of winter, measured, deliberate, and edged with the kind of stillness that asks you to listen more than speak. Penelope found herself waking before the sun, her body rising out of habit before her thoughts caught up. She'd step into the main room, find the fire already stoked, and Asab bent over the stove with a tin mug in hand. His shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair damp from the pump. He never asked her to stay, but the house showed signs of her presence now, a folded apron on the nail near the door, her needlework tucked beside the window, Benji's boots dried carefully by the hearth. One morning, as the sky paled behind the barn, she caught Asab outside splitting cedar. He moved with a slow steadiness, never wasting motion. She watched from the porch until he noticed her, then came down the steps, arms crossed against the cold. You need another pair of hands, she asked. He set the axe aside and offered her a wedge. I won't turn down help, but this ain't a chore for show. I've held worse, she said, kneeling to steady the block. They worked in tandem, her setting pieces, him swinging clean and precise. The sound of splitting wood cracked through the hush like punctuation. When they paused, he leaned on the axe handle and looked at her, his breath fogging in the air. You ever think about moving on? He asked. You mean leaving Wyoming? No, I mean not holding yourself so tight. She drew her gloves tighter, then looked up at him. That's something you think I do? I think you've been surviving so long, you forgot what resting feels like. She didn't answer right away. She stood, brushing bark from her skirt. Resting doesn't come easy when you've had to earn every breath, he nodded. Was the same for me once. She tilted her head. What changed it? He glanced toward the house. Saw a woman stand in a blizzard with a rifle. Figured if she could fight that storm, I could stop hiding from mine. That night, after Benji fell asleep curled around a carved wooden horse Asab had whittled from pine, Penelope sat by the window watching snow drift down in slow spirals. Asab pulled a chair beside her, setting down a mug of warmed cider. Your father teach you to shoot? He asked. She kept her gaze on the glass. He taught me to read tracks, gut a rabbit, and fire with purpose. Said if I ever raised a gun, it better be for something that mattered. You've done right by that. She turned toward him. What about you? Who taught you? Nobody. I learned by missing. She gave a short laugh. That's honest. I was 17 when my brother died, he said. He was the one who could hit a tin can from 40 feet. I was always the one patching up the fence after he knocked it down. She studied his face, lined by wind, not age, shaped by something gentler than he let on. What happened to him? She asked. Caught in a stampede. Wrong place, wrong second. I lit out after that, never stayed anywhere more than a season. And now, he looked at her full and steady, now I think I've found what I never knew I was chasing. They didn't touch, not yet, but the space between them softened. The next afternoon, while Benji sorted kindling in the yard, Penelope stood inside folding linens. Asab entered with snow on his hat, a small coil of rope slung over his shoulder. Cattle gate's got a weak hinge, he said. I'll patch it before the next freeze. She nodded without turning. You always fix things soon as they're broken. He stepped close, voice lower now. Only when they are worth keeping. She stilled, feeling the heat rise in her chest. Later, after supper, she brought out her father's old journal. She hadn't opened it since before the blizzard. Leafing through pages yellowed with age, she read aloud a line he'd written after their mother passed. "Love won't always arrive with laughter," she said. "Sometimes it just stands beside you in silence and stays." She closed the book and looked up. Sam met her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." She rose from the table and crossed the room. This time she reached for his hand. He took it, warm and sure, and they stood there as the fire burned low, the storm outside no match for the quiet certainty within. Snowmelt started slow that March, seeping through the seams of the earth and curling in the hollows like breath held too long. The wind still carried a bite, but the sun stayed longer in the sky each day, stretching its light across the porch where Penelope hung linens to dry. She could smell damp wood and thawing earth, and the sound of Benji's laughter rare, sudden, full drifted from the barn where Asa was teaching him how to loop rope. Penelope folded the last sheet and leaned against the post, her eyes following their shapes in the paddock. Benji's hands were too small for the coil, but Asa didn't correct him much, just showed him once and let him figure the rest. When they came inside, Benji's cheeks were red from wind and triumph. He dropped the rope on the floor and ran to the corner to sort through a tin of nails Asa had given him earlier. Asa set his hat on the hook and flexed his shoulder. "Little fella's got more grit than I did at twice his age." Penelope glanced at the boy. "He's starting to believe he belongs somewhere again." He stepped toward the stove and poured water into the basin. "And you," she dried her hands on her apron. "I haven't decided." Asa turned, leaning one hip against the table. "You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't always tending to what's left behind?" Penelope met his gaze. "That's not a question I've had the luxury of asking. Maybe it's time you did." She took her time answering, letting the quiet settle. "I used to want to keep bees," she said eventually. "My mother had a journal with sketches of hives and wildflower fields. She said honey was a kind of promise, that it came from patience." "I've got lumber," Asa said. "And I know where peach blossom grows wild near the creek." Penelope studied him. "You offering me bees?" He gave a slow nod. "I'm offering what you might build, not just what you've had to defend." That night, after Benji had gone to sleep with a nail clutched in one hand and a rope scrap in the other, Penelope stepped outside without her shawl. The air was sharp, but she didn't mind it. She stood by the fence, the moon catching in the puddles left by melting snow. Asa joined her a minute later, his boots quiet on the packed dirt. "I know you're not one for asking," he said, "but I'd like to take you to town this Sunday." She glanced at him sideways. "For what?" "There's a service, and a wagon maker I owe for a set of wheel rims, but mostly I thought you might want to be seen." Penelope looked out over the pasture. "I haven't worn a dress that fits since the autumn before last." "I've got a pair of boots you can borrow," he said. "They won't fit either." That made her laugh, small and surprised. She turned to him, her fingers brushing his coat sleeve without thinking. "You want the town to know, I want you to know," he said, "that you're not alone anymore. Not in the quiet, not in the hard." They stood that way, the moonlight soft between them, until her hand found his and stayed. Sunday arrived with a sky so bright it felt borrowed. They hitched the wagon after breakfast, Benji tucked between them with a biscuit in hand. The road to town had dried just enough to keep the wheels from sinking, though the ruts jostled the wagon and made Asa keep a steady hand on the reins. When they reached the edge of town, Penelope's jaw tightened. She hadn't walked these streets since before her father's fever, and the thought of being seen, truly seen, unsettled something deep. Asa leaned closer. We're not here to explain, just to live. They stepped down together, Penelope smoothing her skirt, Benji holding her hand. Asa offered his arm, and after a breath, she took it. They walked past the mercantile, past the blacksmith's forge, and when they reached the church steps, an older woman with a lace collar nodded to Penelope and said, "It's good to see you back, Miss Garrison." Penelope paused. "Thank you, ma'am." Inside, the pews were polished and warm from the sun, the preacher's voice low and even. Benji sat between them, hands folded, eyes wide. Penelope kept her shoulders straight, her chin high. But when Asa reached over and let his fingers rest lightly against hers, she didn't pull away. After the service, they stepped back into the light and crossed the street toward the wagon. A man from the livery called out to Asa, but the cowboy just lifted his hand in acknowledgement and kept walking beside her. "You meant it," Penelope said, her voice quiet. "What's that?" "When you said you weren't going anywhere." He stopped, turning to face her. "I meant every word." She studied him a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I suppose it's time I started planning for spring. You thinking of bees again?" "I'm thinking of a home." Asa's eyes held steady on hers. "Then let's build it." She reached up, brushed one strand of wind-blown hair from his face and let her fingers linger. And for the first time in years, Penelope let herself look forward not just to tomorrow, but to all the quiet, steady days after. By April, the ground had softened enough for planting. Beneath the pale swell of thawed earth, Asa turned his spade with the quiet strength of a man used to building things from the bottom up. Penelope knelt nearby, sleeves rolled, fingers fitting seeds into damp furrows. Her hair was bound beneath a kerchief, skin warmed by days spent outside, and her palms bore the faint, honest sting of new calluses. Benji sat on the fence rail behind them, legs swinging. A slate balanced on his lap as he traced letters with a stick of chalk Asa had traded for in town. The boy hummed under his breath, the tune unrecognizable but certain, and for once not haunted by memory. "You always plant in lines this straight?" Penelope asked, glancing at Asa's furrows. "I once lived near a man who measured his rows with a string tied to a stake," he said. "Claimed crooked corn grew crooked thoughts." She leaned back on her heels. "And what do straight rows grow?" He looked at her, a soft grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Hope." She reached for another scoop of soil, but her hand paused. "I haven't had much practice with that." "You're doing fine," he said. "It's not something you need to get right the first time." They finished the last row in comfortable silence, then gathered their tools. Benji jumped down and followed them toward the house, chalk dust smudged across his brow. Inside, the kitchen smelled of early bread and cold milk. Asa washed his hands at the basin while Penelope set dough to rise on the windowsill. The kettle whistled low on the stove. "Have you thought more about the hives?" Asa asked. "I have," she said. "There's flat ground near the creek with enough clover to keep bees busy all summer. I marked it with a stone." "I'll set you up a frame after supper," he said. "There's cedar left in the barn." She nodded, then turned to him and hesitated. "I don't want it just for me." He wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against the counter. "I wouldn't build it if it was." Benji sat at the table, swinging his legs. "Can I help with the bees? You can help keep them calm," Asa said. "They listen better to those who don't rush." "I can be still," Benji said, wide-eyed. Penelope reached over and tousled his hair. "We'll start with one hive. If they do well, maybe two next spring." That evening, after the dishes were dried and Benji had settled on his cot with a book of Psalms open across his chest, Asa and Penelope stood at the edge of the pasture. The sky held a low burn of stars, the moon just a sliver. A fox yipped from far off and the barn creaked softly in the wind. "I've been thinking about your name," he said. My name, Garrison. It's strong, but it sounds like a place someone retreats to. She looked at him, brow furrowed. I don't want you to have to hold the world off anymore, he said. Not alone. Penelope studied his face the way his eyes didn't waver. And what would you call me instead? I'd call you mine, he said, if you'd have me. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached up, her hand sliding over the back of his neck, drawing him down until her forehead touched his. The kiss, when it came, was quiet and certain, like a promise spoken without needing to be heard. Later, after the lamps were blown out and the house had settled, she lay beside him, her hand in his beneath the quilt. The weight of the past didn't vanish, but it no longer pressed down. It simply lived beside her now, quiet and worn, made smaller by love. They were married in late May, just as the first hive began to hum. The preacher from town came out on his buckboard, and the ceremony took place beneath the cottonwoods behind the barn. No bells, no crowd, just the three of them and the wind moving gently through the grass. Benji stood up straight and proud in his brushed shirt, holding a small bouquet of flax and wild rose. After the vows, he wrapped his arms around both of them at once and whispered, "This feels like home." Over the summer, the bees flourished. Penelope kept 2 hives by August, their frames heavy with honey. Asab built her a low bench beside them, and on warm evenings they sat there together, watching the golden light shift across the fields. Benji learned to ride on the mule Asab had once called lame, now steady and sure beneath the boy's growing legs. The land held them, not just in the way it gave back what they planted, but in how it kept their days steady. The storms still came, the wind still howled some nights, but they had walls to hold them and each other's hands to lean on. One evening in September, Penelope stood by the fence, watching Benji race the sunset across the pasture. Asad came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Did you ever think it'd look like this?" he asked. "No," she said, resting her head against his chest. "But I think it was always waiting." He kissed the top of her head, and they stood that way until the boy came laughing back, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. They went inside together, the door closing behind them with a soft, certain click. The fire caught quick in the hearth, and the home they had built together held them close, not as a refuge from the world, but as a place where love had chosen to stay.